3 years ago, during my freshman year at university, I met a girl who would become the center of my world for the next 3 years. At first glance, she was everything I had ever dreamed of: smart, funny, and breathtakingly beautiful. We quickly grew close, bonding over late-night study sessions and shared dreams about our futures. But beneath the surface of what seemed like a perfect relationship lay an undercurrent that would eventually tear us apart. Ellie came from a deeply religious family. Her father was a pastor, and though she no longer shared their faith, the weight of her upbringing lingered heavily in her decisions. Early on, she made it clear that she wanted to remain a virgin until marriage, not because of religion, but out of respect for her father's wishes. While I admired her conviction, this decision created a simmering tension between us, one that gnawed at me more with each passing day. As time went on, the disparity between our desires became impossible to ignore. I wasn't raised with the same strict beliefs, and while I respected Ellie's choice, I couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was missing from our relationship. It felt like I was trapped in a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but suffocating within. The intimacy we shared stopped short of true fulfillment, leaving me craving something deeper, something more complete. Meanwhile, Ellie seemed content, even thriving, as if she didn't feel the void that haunted me every night. My frustration grew into resentment, not toward her, but toward the circumstances that kept us tethered to a half-life together. Friends around me were exploring relationships without such constraints, and I couldn't help but wonder why fate had placed me in this predicament. Was I being tested? Punished? Or was this simply how love worked, full of sacrifices you never saw coming? The emotional toll began to mount, turning what should have been moments of joy into silent battles of willpower and self-control. Every stolen kiss or whispered "I love you" carried the unspoken weight of what we couldn't or wouldn't give each other. And yet, despite the growing storm inside me, I stayed. Because love, as they say, isn't always easy. But staying didn't mean things would get better. In fact, it only set the stage for a reckoning. Neither of us could foresee a reckoning that would change both our lives forever. As graduation loomed closer, the cracks in our relationship grew wider and more irreparable. For 3 long years, I had tried to convince myself that love alone was enough, that intimacy didn't need to be physical to feel complete. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true for me. The disparity between what I wanted and what Ellie could give became an insurmountable chasm. Every time she talked about her work or mentioned the successful guys she met at the office, I felt like a shadow of who I should have been: broke, inexperienced, and perpetually unsatisfied. It wasn't just about sex. It was about feeling like we were living 2 entirely different lives. While she thrived in her professional world, I stagnated emotionally, unable to reconcile my desires with the reality of our situation. The breaking point came one evening after yet another argument. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the silence between us heavy with unspoken grievances. She looked at me with those same beautiful eyes that once made my heart race. But now they only reminded me of everything we couldn't have together. When I finally said the words, "I think we should break up," the room seemed to freeze. Ellie's face crumpled instantly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Before I could even finish explaining myself, she begged me not to leave, clutching my arm as if letting go would mean losing herself entirely. Her sobs echoed through the apartment, each one cutting deeper into my resolve. I hated myself in that moment, but I also knew staying would mean sacrificing my own happiness and hers too, eventually. For weeks after the breakup, Ellie texted me constantly, pleading for answers, for closure, for anything that might bring us back together. But I couldn't respond. Seeing her name flash across my phone screen only reopened wounds I desperately needed to heal. Friends told me how much she cried when talking about me, how she refused to believe this was really the end. One mutual friend confided that Ellie stayed up late most nights, replaying memories of us over and over again in her mind. It broke my heart to hear it, but I reminded myself why I had ended things. Because love isn't supposed to hurt this much. Still, guilt gnawed at me relentlessly. Was I selfish, cruel, or simply human? Ellie's pain lingered like a ghost, haunting both our lives. Though we agreed to stop contacting each other, her absence left a void neither of us could fill. And while I tried to focus on finishing university and preparing for my future, part of me wondered if I'd ever truly move past what we had, or if she ever would. 6 months had passed since the breakup, and just when I thought I was beginning to heal, Ellie reappeared in my life like a ghost from the past. Out of nowhere, she reached out, asking to meet up. At first, I hesitated. My wounds were still raw, and seeing her felt like reopening scars that hadn't fully closed. But curiosity got the better of me. After all, we'd shared 3 years of our lives together. How could I not hear her out? When we finally met, she looked nervous but determined. She confessed that she'd missed me terribly during those 6 months, that she regretted letting me go, and most shockingly, that she was now open to having a sexual relationship with me. My heart raced at her words, but something about them didn't sit right. I asked her point blank why she'd changed her mind after all this time. Her answer came haltingly, reluctantly. She admitted to having a short-term fling with an older man from her workplace. Shortly after our breakup, a revelation that hit me like a freight train. The room seemed to spin as her confession sank in. All those years I'd waited, respecting her wishes, sacrificing what I wanted most, only for her to give herself to someone else within months of us parting ways. It wasn't just the act itself that stung, it was the betrayal of everything I thought we stood for. Had I been nothing more than a placeholder while she figured out what she truly desired? The irony was suffocating. I ended things because I couldn't have the intimacy I craved. And now she was offering it, but too late. Every fiber of my being screamed that I deserved better than to be second-guessed or used as some kind of fallback option. Ellie tried to explain, saying the guy had pursued her relentlessly until she gave in, but her excuses rang hollow. If anything, they made it worse. Was she trying to absolve herself of guilt by painting him as the aggressor? Or was she simply trying to spare my feelings? Either way, her words did little to dull the sharp edges of my pain. As I sat there listening to her, I couldn't help but feel like a fool, like all my patience and understanding had amounted to nothing. I told her I needed space to process everything, but deep down, I knew one thing for certain. No matter how much I still cared for her, trusting her again would be impossible. As I sat there, staring at Ellie across the table, her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, ominous and heavy with implications. She had just confessed that things with Tim weren't as serious as she initially made them out to be. But something about her explanation didn't sit right. Her eyes darted around nervously, avoiding mine whenever she mentioned him. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my instincts scream that something was off. Was this really about us rekindling what we once had? Or was it simply a desperate attempt to salvage something before everything fell apart for her again? The more I thought about it, the more doubts crept into my mind like poison. Hadn't she told me herself how devastated she felt after our breakup? How she missed me constantly and wanted nothing more than to see me during those months apart. Yet here she was, now, claiming she was ready to give me everything I'd ever wanted from her full relationship. Intimacy included, but only after having been with someone else. The timing felt too convenient, too calculated. Was I truly her first choice, or merely her fallback plan when things went south with Tim? Ellie's behavior over the past few weeks only fueled my suspicions. When she reached out to meet up, her messages were urgent, almost pleading, as though she couldn't bear the thought of losing me completely. But why now? Why not earlier, when I was still raw from the breakup and might have welcomed her back without question? Instead, she waited until after her fling with Tim ended badly, leaving her emotionally bruised and possibly regretful. Was she using me to fill the void he left behind? To prove to herself, or worse, to him, that she could still command love and loyalty from another man? I tried to push these thoughts aside, reminding myself of all the good times we shared, of how much I still cared for her despite everything. But no matter how hard I fought against it, the nagging voice in my head grew louder. What if this wasn't real? What if Ellie wasn't coming back because she genuinely loved me, but because she needed someone safe, familiar, predictably lifeline to cling to while she figured out her next move? The idea stung more than I cared to admit, cutting deeper than any betrayal or rejection ever could. Love shouldn't feel like a gamble, yet here I was, weighing whether to trust her intentions or walk away for good. Just when I thought I had finally closed the chapter on Ellie, she reappeared in my life like a storm I couldn't outrun. After our last conversation, where she admitted that her relationship with Tim was far more serious than the fling she initially described, I felt blindsided. She didn't just confirm they were back together. She went out of her way to paint him as this larger-than-life figure. Tim, as it turned out, wasn't just some random guy from work. He was a director at their firm, one step below partner, with an expensive car, designer suits, and a lifestyle that screamed success. And there I was, still adjusting to my first professional job, living paycheck to paycheck while trying to climb out of years of student poverty. The contrast between us felt like a slap in the face. Ellie's tone during our meeting only added salt to the wound. She spoke about Tim with a mix of admiration and pride, emphasizing how ambitious and accomplished he was. It was clear she wanted me to know exactly what I was missing. Man who could offer her everything she now realized she wanted: wealth, status, excitement. Every word she said seemed calculated to remind me of everything I wasn't. While I had spent 3 years loving her quietly, respecting her boundaries, and struggling through university, Tim swooped in with his charm and resources, effortlessly giving her the kind of life I couldn't even dream of providing yet. What stung most wasn't just the comparison, it was the realization that maybe she'd always been destined for someone like him. Someone worldly, polished, and unapologetically driven. Meanwhile, I felt like a shadow of who I needed to be, still figuring myself out, still chasing stability. Her words echoed in my mind long after she left. Tim has big plans for us. Big plans. As if my dreams of building a simple, meaningful life together paled in comparison to his grand ambitions. I tried to shake off the insecurity creeping into my thoughts, but it lingered like a dark cloud. Was I truly not enough for her? Or had I simply been too naive to see the gap between us all along? The tension between us was palpable as Ellie stood at my doorstep, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the strap of her bag. She had shown up unannounced, insisting that we needed to talk one last time to clear the air. I hesitated before letting her in, knowing this conversation wouldn't be easy, but something about the desperation in her voice made me relent. As soon as we sat down, the weight of everything unsaid hung heavy in the room. For hours, we dissected the tangled web of our past, her decisions, my feelings, and the choices that led us here. But just when I thought we were nearing closure, Ellie's composure shattered. Her voice cracked mid-sentence, and tears began streaming down her face. "I still have feelings for you," she admitted, her words barely audible through choked sobs. My heart clenched, not out of longing, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. Here was Ellie, the girl I once loved more than anything, breaking down in front of me, confessing emotions I never expected to hear again. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, as if the universe wanted to test my resolve one final time. Her admission hit me like a tidal wave, stirring memories of all the laughter, arguments, and quiet moments we shared over 3 years. But beneath those fleeting echoes of nostalgia was a cold, Sobering truth, she wasn't mine anymore, and I couldn't let myself fall into old patterns. "I'm sorry, Ellie," I said firmly, though every word felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 regrets. "We can't go back. You've moved on, and so have I." Her eyes widened, searching mine for any sign of hesitation, but I held my ground. This wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about respecting the boundaries we both agreed upon. Still, seeing her cry like that unnerved me. It wasn't supposed to end this way. Part of me wished we could rewind to simpler times before misunderstandings and misaligned desires tore us apart. But life doesn't work like that. As Ellie wiped her tears and composed herself, there was an unspoken acknowledgement between us. This really was the end. Life had finally started to fall into place for me. After months of navigating the emotional wreckage of my past with Ellie, I was thriving in my new role as a graduate engineer. The job was everything I'd hoped for: challenging, rewarding, and a gateway to financial stability after years of scraping by as a student. On top of that, I had met Olivia, a sharp-witted and stunning accountant who happened to be my housemate's sister. From the moment we met at a casual BBQ, there was an undeniable spark between us. Her intelligence, humor, and warmth drew me in completely, and within weeks, we were inseparable. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was truly happy. But fate has a way of testing even the strongest resolve. One evening, Olivia invited me to a work party hosted by one of her colleagues. It was a lively gathering, filled with laughter and chatter, and I was enjoying myself immensely until I spotted them. Across the room stood Ellie, looking nothing like the girl I once knew. Gone was the modest pastor's daughter. In her place was a sleek, polished woman dripping in expensive jewelry and wearing a form-fitting red dress that screamed confidence. And on her finger gleamed a massive diamond engagement ring. Standing beside her was Tim, his presence unmistakable despite our brief encounter at another event months earlier. The sight of them hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced with conflicting emotions: shock at how much Ellie had transformed, lingering nostalgia for the life we almost shared, and a strange sense of inadequacy compared to Tim's polished demeanor. But before I could spiral too far into those thoughts, Olivia appeared at my side. Without hesitation, she slipped her hand into mine, grounding me instantly. Her touch was a silent reminder. This was my present, not some shadowy echo of my past. When Ellie noticed us together, her smile faltered briefly, but she quickly recovered, introducing herself to Olivia with forced politeness. The tension in the air was palpable, yet Olivia's calm assurance kept me steady. As we walked away later, leaving Ellie and Tim behind, I realized something crucial. No matter how much Ellie had changed or how dazzling her new life seemed, it no longer had any hold over me. Just when I thought Ellie had finally accepted that our story was over, she proved me wrong in the most unsettling way. Days after our awkward encounter at the charity dinner, my brother messaged me to say Ellie had shown up at his place looking for me. Thankfully, he didn't give her my new address. He simply told her I'd moved out. But that wasn't the end of it. The next morning, an email appeared in my inbox from an unfamiliar address. It was Ellie brazenly breaking her promise of no contact, as if our agreement meant nothing to her. Her words hit me like a calculated jab, dripping with faux warmth and thinly veiled curiosity. "It was so great to see you again," she wrote, casually mentioning how much she missed me before shifting gears to ask about Olivia. "That girl you were with is pretty. How serious is it?" She probed, adding smugly that she and Tim had big plans for their wedding next year and hoped I'd attend. My blood boiled as I read her message. How dare she insert herself into my life again after everything? She wasn't just reaching out, she was testing me, trying to gauge whether I still harbored feelings for her while flaunting her engagement like some twisted trophy. I showed the email to Olivia, expecting her to share my frustration. But instead, she smirked knowingly. "She's fishing," Olivia said bluntly. "She wants to know if you're happy without her." Her insight cut through the noise, making Ellie's intentions painfully clear. This wasn't about reconnecting or reminiscing. It was about control. Ellie couldn't stand the idea of me moving on, especially not with someone as radiant and confident as Olivia. I felt a surge of anger, not because Ellie doubted me, but because she doubted herself. Did she really think I'd drop everything to be her emotional crutch again? Or worse, did she believe I'd show up at her wedding, watching her pledge her life to another man? I deleted the email without hesitation and blocked the address, ensuring there would be no more sneaky attempts to worm her way back into my world. When Olivia asked if I was worried about Ellie's persistence, I shook my head. "Not anymore," I replied firmly. With Olivia by my side, I realized something crucial. Ellie's games weren't worth my time. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. In the months that followed, life began to feel like a chapter I never thought I'd reach, one where Ellie's shadow no longer loomed over me. Olivia became my anchor. Her unwavering support and sharp intuition, helping me see through the lingering doubts and insecurities Ellie had left behind. She didn't just stand by me. She challenged me to grow, to confront the parts of myself I'd long ignored. "You're not the same person you were 3 years ago," she told me one evening as we sat on the balcony of our shared house, the city lights twinkling below us. Her words struck a chord. I wasn't that naive, uncertain boy anymore, the one who clung to a relationship out of fear of being alone. I was someone new, stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. But letting go of the past wasn't without its moments of turbulence. When Ellie resurfaced with her carefully crafted emails, probing into my life with Olivia, it felt like reopening an old wound. Yet this time, I handled it differently. With Olivia's guidance, I saw Ellie's actions for what they truly were: a desperate attempt to reclaim something she'd lost, rather than genuine concern for my well-being. Blocking her email address felt symbolic, like closing a door I'd been hesitant to shut for so long. It wasn't just about cutting ties with Ellie. It was about severing the hold she'd unknowingly kept on my psyche. As weeks turned into months, the weight of those memories began to lift. My days were filled with purpose, thriving in my engineering career, exploring Melbourne's vibrant neighborhoods with Olivia, and rediscovering hobbies I'd abandoned during my university years. The void Ellie once occupied was now filled with laughter, ambition, and hope. Looking back, I realized how much I'd grown, not because of her, but despite her. The pain of our breakup, the betrayal of her fling, and even the sting of seeing her transformed at that charity dinner, all shaped me into someone capable of moving forward. The story of Ellie will always be part of my history, but it no longer defines me. As I stood beside Olivia at another social gathering recently, watching her light up a room with her confidence and charm, I knew I'd made the right choices. Life isn't about avoiding heartbreak, it's about learning from it. And as I embraced the future ahead, I carried with me a powerful lesson. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes lead to the most beautiful beginnings.